You are standing on a beach in East Africa. It is 70,000 years ago. Your group has been walking for weeks. You started inland, where the rivers were drying up and the game was disappearing. You followed a river to the coast, hoping for better hunting. Now you are here, standing at the edge of a continent. You are looking at an ocean you have never seen before. The water stretches to the horizon, blue and endless. You can smell the salt in the air, a smell you have never encountered. You do not know what is on the other side. You cannot even imagine that there is an other side. Behind you is the only world you have ever known. In front of you is nothing but water. Your feet are bare, calloused, and tough as leather. The salt water stings. The cuts you did not even notice. Somewhere behind you, a child is crying. Someone is arguing about which way to go. But here's the thing about your species. You are not good at staying still. You never have been. Your ancestors walked out of the trees, then out of the forest, then out of the savanna. Now you are about to walk out of Africa. You do not know it yet. You think you are just looking for food. But you are about to begin the greatest journey any species has ever undertaken. By the time your descendants are done, they will have reached every continent on Earth, except Antarctica. They will have crossed oceans, deserts, ice sheets, and mountain ranges. And every one of them, including you, carries the genetic signature of that journey inside every cell of your body. Now let me ask you something. How far can you walk in one day? 20 kilometers, 30 kilometers, maybe 40 if you really push yourself. Now imagine walking 40 kilometers every single day, for year after year, for your entire life, without roads, without maps, without knowing where you are going, without knowing if there is anything at your destination. That is what your ancestors did. For tens of thousands of years, they walked from Africa to Asia. They walked from Africa to Asia, from Asia to Australia, from Asia to the Americas. They crossed deserts that would kill any other primate in days. They crossed mountains that reached into the clouds. They crossed ice sheets that stretched for thousands of kilometers. They crossed open oceans in boats made from trees and animal skins. They colonized every continent on Earth except Antarctica, and they did it with nothing but their feet, their hands, and a brain that refused to accept that anywhere was unreachable. Let me be clear about what we are talking about. The human migration out of Africa is not a single event. It is not a story with a beginning and an end. It is a process that has been running for 2 million years and is still running today. We are going to break this story into 12 chapters. From the first steps out of Africa to the last islands of the Pacific, from the genetic evidence in your blood to the archaeological evidence in the ground. By the end, you will understand not just how your ancestors walked across the world, but why they did it, and you may discover that the same force that drove them is still driving you. Let us start at the very beginning. The first humans to leave Africa were not Homo sapiens. They were Homo erectus, and they made the journey nearly 2 million years ago. Fossil evidence from Dmanisi in the country of Georgia shows that Homo erectus had reached the Caucasus by 1,000 million years ago. These were not modern humans by any stretch of the imagination. They had smaller brains, heavier brows, shorter legs, and a body built for endurance, walking. A 2014 study by Dr. David Lord Kipanidze at the Georgian National Museum analyzed the Dmanisi skulls and concluded that these early travelers were surprisingly small, standing only about 150 centimeters tall. But what they lacked in size, they made up for in stamina. Their long legs and narrow hips were built for walking. Their sweating ability, unique among primates, allowed them to cool their bodies during sustained exercise in the heat of the savanna. They were, in every biological sense, walking machines. Here is the question nobody has fully answered. Why did they leave? Africa was the ancestral homeland. It had food, water, and familiar environments. Why would anyone walk away from that into the complete unknown? One theory, proposed by Dr. Robin Dennell at the University of Exeter, is that climate fluctuations push populations out of Africa during periods of severe drought. When the grasslands shrank and the herds moved north, the hunters followed. They did not know they were leaving Africa. They did not have a concept of continents or borders. They were just following dinner. Now let me take you to the most important migration of all, the one that made you. Around 70,000 years ago, a small group of Homo sapiens, probably no more than a few hundred individuals, crossed from the Horn of Africa into what is now Yemen. The sea level was lower then. So the crossing was a narrow strip of water, maybe a few kilometers wide. They may have crossed on a raft made of bound reeds. They may have crossed on a log. They may have waded through water, shallow enough to walk. We do not know for sure, and we may never know. What we do know is that once they reached the Arabian Peninsula, they did not turn inland. They followed the coast. This was the great coastal highway of human migration. A 2011 study by Dr. Michael Petraglia at the Max Planck Institute for the Science of Human History documented stone tools along the coast of Arabia that match African toolmaking traditions. These tools, dated to around 70,000 years ago, are the footprints of the first modern humans to leave Africa. They prove that the migration happened along the coast, not through the interior. Why the coast? Because the coast was a supermarket. Shellfish, fish, seabirds, turtles, and edible seaweed provided a reliable food source that did not require chasing herds across the open savanna. The coastal environment was more stable than the interior. The temperature was moderated by the ocean. The water was drinkable from the rivers that emptied into the sea, and the coastline itself was a natural highway. You just kept the water on your right and walked. Your ancestors followed the coast of Arabia, then Iran, then India, then Southeast Asia. They walked the entire length of the Indian Ocean coastline, that is over 10,000 kilometers, and they did it over thousands of years, generation after generation, each taking a few more steps east. There was no plan, there was no destination. There was only the next beach, the next river mouth, the next forest, and the relentless human urge to see what was around the next corner. Let me tell you how we know this. The evidence is not just in the ground. It is in your body. Every human alive today carries mitochondrial DNA, genetic material passed down exclusively from mother to child. By comparing mitochondrial DNA from populations around the world, geneticists can trace the maternal lineage of every living human back to a single woman who lived in Africa around 150,000 years ago. Scientists call her mitochondrial Eve. A 2019 study by Dr. Topert Pedro Sars at the University of Porto used mitochondrial DNA to map the exact routes of human migration out of Africa. The genetic trail shows a clear path from East Africa to the Arabian Peninsula, along the coast of India, into Southeast Asia, and from there into Australia and the Pacific Islands. Every step of that journey is recorded in the DNA of modern populations. But here is the remarkable part. The genetic diversity of humans decreases the further you get from Africa. Populations in East Africa have the highest genetic diversity on Earth. European populations have less, Native American populations have even less. Indigenous Australian populations have the least. This pattern tells us something profound. Only a small subset of the original African population ever left, and then only a subset of that group went even further. They represented a tiny fraction of the original African genetic pool. You are not the product of all of humanity. You are the product of a small, brave, incredibly lucky group of people who kept walking when everyone else stayed home. Your ancestors made a series of bets, each one riskier than the last, and you are living proof that those bets paid off. Now let me walk with you through Asia. The journey from the Middle East to Southeast Asia took tens of thousands of years. But once humans reached Southeast Asia, they encountered a landscape that no longer exists on Earth. During the last ice age, sea levels were over 120 meters lower than they are today. This means that many of the islands of Southeast Asia were connected by dry land. Sumatra, Java, and Borneo were part of a single landmass that geologists call Sunda. You could walk from mainland Asia all the way to Bali without getting your feet wet. But beyond Bali lay a completely different world, the islands of Wallacea, named after the naturalist Alfred Russel Wallace, were separated by deep ocean channels that remained filled with water. Even during the Ice Age, to reach Australia, humans had to cross open water for the first time. They had to become sailors. A 2018 study by Dr. Du Gerrit van den Berg at the University of Wollongong found evidence of human presence on the island of Flores in Indonesia as early as 1 million years ago. This means that Homo erectus, not just Homo sapiens, was crossing open water. The first sailors were not modern humans. They were an earlier species with a smaller brain and a simpler toolkit. And yet they looked at the ocean and decided to cross it. Let that sink in for a moment. The invention of the boat, or at least the raft, happened at least 1 million years ago, It happened before the invention of agriculture by 900,000 years, before the invention of writing by almost 1,000,000 years, before the invention of the wheel by 950 divine years. The first boat was not built for trade. It was not built for fishing. It was built because someone wanted to see what was on the other side. That same curiosity, by the way, sent humans to the moon. The only difference is the technology. The impulse is identical. Let me take you to Australia. Around 5,000 years ago, a group of humans crossed the Wallisine Islands and landed on the shores of a continent that had never seen a primate before. This was the first time any human had set foot on Australian soil. The journey required multiple open ocean crossings. Each one was over 50 kilometers of open water, far beyond the horizon. These were not accidental drifts on broken logs. They were deliberate, planned voyages, requiring boats that could carry people and supplies. A 2017 study by Dr. Chris Clarkson at the University of Queensland analyzed the Majid Bay rock shelter in northern Australia and found stone tools dating to 605,000 years ago. This discovery pushed back the date of human arrival in Australia by thousands of years. The site also contained ground-edge stone axes, the oldest such tools found anywhere in the world. Here's what this tells us about the first Australians. They were not primitive scavengers barely scraping by. They were sophisticated technologists who brought advanced tool-making knowledge with them. They knew how to shape stone, wood, and bone into complex tools. They knew how to manage fire on a landscape scale, deliberately burning vegetation to create open hunting grounds. They knew how to navigate by the stars, the wind patterns, and the ocean currents. And when they arrived, they found a continent full of giant animals that had never encountered a human predator. Giant kangaroos that stood 3 meters tall, wombats the size of small cars, monitor lizards 7 meters long, flightless birds taller than a person. Within a few thousand years of human arrival, most of these giant species were extinct. The lesson was clear. Wherever humans go, the ecosystem changes forever. Now let me take you to Europe. Europe was colonized late in human history. The first Homo sapiens arrived around 45,000 years ago, when the continent was in the grip of the last ice age. Northern Europe was buried under a massive ice sheet, 2 kilometers thick. Southern Europe was a cold, dry steppe, like modern Siberia. Neanderthals had been living there for over 3,000 years. When modern humans entered Europe, they entered a conflict zone. They competed with Neanderthals for the best caves, the best hunting grounds, the best water sources. The archaeological record shows that within 5,000 years of modern human arrival, Neanderthals were gone. A 2015 study by Dr. Tom Hyam at the University of Oxford used radiocarbon dating to pinpoint the timing of Neanderthal extinction. The last Neanderthals disappeared from Europe around 4,000 years ago, just a few thousand years after modern humans arrived. The exact nature of their disappearance is still debated, but the timing is suspicious. What did modern humans have that Neanderthals lacked? Better hunting weapons, including projectile spears that could be thrown from a safe distance, more efficient social networks that allowed them to share food and information across larger areas, faster reproductive rates and shorter generation times, and perhaps most importantly, the ability to adapt to a wider range of environmental conditions. Neanderthals were specialists in cold environments. Modern humans were generalists who could survive almost anywhere. When the climate fluctuated wildly during the Ice Age, the generalists won. There is also genetic evidence that modern humans and Neanderthals interbred. If you are of European or Asian descent, approximately 2% of your DNA comes from Neanderthals. They did not completely disappear. A part of them lives on in you. Let me take you to the last continents to be colonized, North and South America. For most of human history, the Americas were completely empty of people. No human had ever set foot there. The reason was the ice. To reach the Americas from Asia, you had to cross Beringia, a land bridge that connected Siberia to Alaska when sea levels were low. But even if you crossed Beringia, you faced a wall of ice that covered most of what is now Canada. For thousands of years, that ice wall was completely impassable. Then, around 116,000 years ago, a narrow corridor opened between the two massive ice sheets. This corridor, running along the eastern edge of the Rocky Mountains, became the highway for the first Americans. A 2018 study by Dr. Esk Willerslev at the University of Cambridge analyzed the DNA of the oldest known human skeleton from the Americas, a 2,000-year-old individual from Montana known as Anzigwan. The DNA showed that the first Americans were directly related to modern Native American populations. Their ancestors had crossed from Siberia and then spread southward at astonishing speed. But a competing theory suggests something even more surprising. Archaeological sites along the coast of Chile, such as Monteverde, date to 1,400 years ago, which is older than the ice-free corridor. This means that some of the first Americans may have arrived by boat, hugging the Pacific coastline, hopping from beach to beach. They may have sailed along the coast of Alaska, Canada, and the United States before the interior was even accessible. Either way, the message is the same. Ice, mountains, oceans, deserts. None of it stopped them. They kept moving until there was nowhere left to go. The Americas were colonized in a geological instant within 2,000 years of the first arrival. Humans had reached the southern tip of South America. Now, let me take you to the last great human migration, the settlement of the Pacific Islands. Around 3,500 years ago, a people known as the Lapita began the most remarkable navigation feat in human history. They set out from the islands of Southeast Asia in double-hulled canoes, carrying pigs, chickens, dogs, and seed crops. They sailed east into the vast Pacific Ocean, a body of water that covers 1/3 of the Earth's entire surface. A 2018 study by Dr. David Reich at Harvard Medical School used ancient DNA to trace the origins of the Lapita people. The genetic evidence shows that they were a mixture of East Asian farmers and Papuan hunter-gatherers, who developed a unique culture built entirely around ocean navigation. The Lapita did not sail randomly. They read the stars, the ocean swells. The ocean swells, the flight patterns of birds, the color of the sky at sunset. They could detect the presence of an island from over 50 kilometers away by reading the way the waves bent around it. They carried this knowledge across generations, refined by every successful voyage, preserved in the memories of their finest navigators. Within 2,000 years, the descendants of the Lapita had colonized every inhabitable island in the Pacific. They reached Hawaii, the most remote island chain on Earth, over 3,000 kilometers from the nearest continent. They reached Easter Island, 3,500 kilometers from the coast of South America. They reached New Zealand, the last major landmass to be settled by humans. They crossed distances of over 4,000 kilometers of open ocean without maps, without compasses, without any modern technology. And when they arrived at a new island, they brought with them everything they needed to build a civilization from scratch. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you did something that required that much courage? When was the last time you sailed into the complete unknown, trusting only your knowledge and your community to bring you through? Let me ask you a deeper question. Why do we move? Evolutionary psychologists have proposed several explanations. One is the resource tracking hypothesis. Humans move when local resources are depleted. This is the most obvious reason, but it does not explain everything. A second explanation is the climate push hypothesis. When the climate changed dramatically, environments that had been hospitable became hostile. Populations that survived had to relocate or die. But there is a third explanation that is much more interesting. It is called the exploration pull hypothesis. Some humans move, not because they have to, but because they want to. They are drawn by pure curiosity, by the desire to see what is over the next hill, by the thrill of discovering something that no one has ever seen before. A 2016 study by Dr. Svante Pääbo at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology found that modern humans carry a specific gene variant called Dr. D47R, which is associated with novelty-seeking behavior. This gene variant is significantly more common in populations whose ancestors migrated the farthest from Africa. The implication is striking. People who kept walking had a genetic predisposition for restlessness. You may carry that gene right now. That restless feeling you get when you have been in the same place for too long. That urge to see something new. That dissatisfaction with the familiar. That is not a personality quirk. It is the genetic legacy of your migrating ancestors. It is the same impulse that drove humans across continents and oceans, into the unknown. Let me show you the other side of the story. Migration was not always successful. For every group that made it, many more died. Genetic studies have identified several population bottlenecks in human history. These are moments when the number of living humans dropped to just a few thousand individuals. The most severe bottleneck occurred around 74,000 years ago, when a supervolcano erupted at Mount Toba in Indonesia. The eruption was the largest volcanic event in the last 25 million years. It may have reduced the global human population to as few as 3,000 to million individuals. A 2018 study by Dr. Stanley Ambrose at the University of Illinois argued that the Toba eruption caused a 6-year volcanic winter, followed by a 1,000-year cooling period. Ash blocked the sun, temperatures dropped, plants died. The human population of Africa and Asia was decimated. The few survivors carried the entire genetic diversity of humanity on their shoulders. Every human alive today is descended from that small group. You are here because your ancestors survived the worst catastrophe in human history. They survived the cold, the hunger, the disease, the fear. And when it was over, they started walking again. Let me bring this home to you, literally. Open your phone and look at your photos. If you are like most people, you have pictures of places you have visited, not just places where you live. You like to travel. You get restless when you stay in one place for too long. That is not a coincidence. It is a biological inheritance. Every major human population on Earth carries genetic markers that trace back to specific migration routes. If you are of European descent, your ancestors were among the first modern humans to enter Europe, competing with Neanderthals for survival. If you are of Asian descent, your ancestors walked the coastal highway from Africa to the Far East. If you are of indigenous American descent, your ancestors crossed the Bering Land Bridge and walked all the way to the tip of South America. If you are of African descent, your ancestors carry the deepest genetic diversity on the planet. The original human inheritance. A 2020 study by Dr. Pontus Skoglund at the Francis Crick Institute mapped the genetic history of human populations across the world. The map shows that human migration was not a simple outward expansion. It was a complex web of movement, mixing, retreat, and advancement. Populations split apart came back together, interbred, exchanged genes, languages, and technologies. Your genome is a record of all those movements. You carry the DNA of your African ancestors, your Eurasian ancestors, your Neanderthal and Denisovan cousins. You are not a pure product of any one place. You are a mosaic of migrations. Here is the truth that nobody talks about. The human migration out of Africa never ended. It is still happening right now. People are still moving. They are leaving their homes in search of better lives. They are crossing deserts, oceans, and borders. They are fleeing war, famine, and climate change. They are walking the same routes their ancestors walked tens of thousands of years ago. The Syrian refugee crossing the Mediterranean in a rubber boat is part of this story. The Central American migrant walking through Mexico is part of this story. The Rohingya family fleeing across the Myanmar border is part of this story. The economic migrant from West Africa crossing the Sahara is part of this story. They are all driven by the same force that drove your ancestors out of Africa, the same restless, desperate, hopeful force. You can build walls. You can close borders. You can pass laws. But you cannot stop the migration. It is coded into your DNA. It is the thing that made you. It is the thing that will always define you as a species. Let me ask you to look at your own life. How many times have you moved? How many times have you left a familiar place for an unfamiliar one? How many times have you felt the pull of somewhere else, even when you could not explain why? That pull is not random. It is ancient. It is the same pull that made your ancestors walk out of Africa 70,000 years ago. It is the same pull that made the Lapita sail into the empty Pacific. It is the same pull that made the first Americans cross the ice into an unknown continent. You are not separate from that story. You are the latest chapter in a book that has